Hi, I'm Jennifer,
I'm Mike.
And I'm Andrea.
and
And
we're
we're
not
at the
saints. And we did that together
We
for the
did.
first time ever. Oh my
And
goodness.
just in time for the season finale.
Anyway, welcome back to We're Not Saints. And as Andrea just mentioned, this is our final episode of season 3, which it just flies by so quickly. At least I think it does. Anyway, today we are talking about another incredible saint. I don't know if each one just gets more interesting, more exciting, but I really am in love with Catherine of Siena. She was one of 25. That still amazes me. And she was a twin. So she was 23 and 24 of the 25. Now, I don't remember how many survived. And
Somebody needed to tell her parents how that happens because I don't think they got it.
yes, they did get it. I wish I had 25 kids. Oh my God, life would be
Yeah.
so much fun. Anyway, off that topic, she from a young age had an amazing relationship with Jesus. And when she was like 5 or 6, she was walking with her brother and she just stopped. And he could not see what she saw, but she saw Jesus surrounded by Peter, Paul, and John. And Jesus blessed her. And from that moment on, her life was devoted to Jesus. And as they'll go on, Andrea and Mike will tell more stories about her. She never became a nun, but she was so powerful within our faith that she became a doctor of the church. And today, and I believe I'm correct when I say there are only 4 women doctors of the church. And she never was educated, never went to school, but was known for her letter writing, well, for so many things. So I'm going to turn the mic to you guys and let you take over.
Thank you. The interesting thing to follow that up with her writings, as she did all this writing, she was not educated, which, we've had saints. Our last saint was the same thing. She had very little education, but she became a great writer and she
That's
wrote
right.
hundreds and hundreds of documents, and she was very influential to, kings and the Pope and leaders. And I mean, she just was very influential with no education. It's very remarkable.
Yeah.
So she obviously had someone guiding her, which is
Jesus.
one of which is part of
Jesus.
her story.
Yes.
So she was born in Siena, Italy in 1347. She died April 29th, 1880 in Rome at age 33, which seems like this 33's been popping up the last couple saints. It was like, it's got to be something. We're missing a message here on the 33 because that's how old Jesus was when he was crucified.
Exactly.
I don't know if that has anything to do with this particular saint, but I just like all of a sudden there's another 33. I'm like, what is going on? And she became a doctor of the church by Pope Paul the Sixth, I believe. And a doctor of the church is someone that is a teacher that their teachings are carried on for centuries, even after their death.
Right.
That's when they become a doctor of the church. It's not like a medical doctor. It's a doctor.
Right.
So they're like an expert teacher.
I would just add that she also was named the co-patron saint of Italy, and her co-patron would be Saint Francis of Assisi. And she got to this point because of how much she committed herself and her life and her faith to God. And I think it's really important to look at the characteristics that make up these saints and explain how they find themselves in the positions that they're in, even after death. But to know your purpose at such a young age and to see that vision at such a young age, I think is really powerful. And I always mention how I'm a little bit like, man, I wish I could know my purpose that early on in life. And I think all of us, we search for our purpose as we grow up, but it's amazing that she was able to see that and then become the influence that she became for not only other Catholics, but even some popes as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then also, as Jennifer had mentioned, she was one of 25 children. And I believe 13 of her siblings died during the Black Plague.
Right.
Which it's hard to imagine that a third of the population died during the Black Plague, which, I mean, that's a
lot.
I can't believe that. You would think if you lived through something like that, you would think it was like the end of the world. Jesus must be coming back because God's
right.
He's taking us one by one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, some people might feel that way about COVID or, other things that we've experienced
Yeah.
in recent history. But it would be, I know we looked at other areas of her life. It would be interesting to think about the family dynamic when you go through those things and the trauma bond probably with the others.
Yeah, that's what I
Exactly.
was, we were talking about that. You can imagine having all that death around you and losing 13 of your own children and have to bury them. And I don't know, I would assume at the time they were, if someone got the sickness, they had to be isolated because otherwise, I mean, even then they knew that it would be spreading.
Right.
So it'd be hard to do.
And
But
keeping the faith through all of that time, staying faithful to God through
yeah,
that. It just
yeah,
probably gets harder and harder each time, but
Yeah.
or it gets stronger. Either you can go that direction where it's like, "Why, God, did you take these people away from me?" Or it could strengthen your faith, and I know we've talked about that a lot on the
yeah,
podcast.
And one thing I love too is that she did have such a strong relationship with Jesus. And I don't know if you guys read about it, but she said she received Jesus's heart and he received hers. And so she saw a wedding ring on her finger. No one else could see it.
hmm
But
Right.
that's how,
Oh, she wrote that she had an invisible stigmata,
yes.
of the wounds of Jesus, and she felt the pain,
But no one could see
but
them
no
but
one
her.
could see them. She also helped the sick. I mean, she was a nurse. I mean, she aided in people dying. That was one of
Cared
her.
for sick people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that I couldn't imagine that. But yeah, she was or extraordinary young woman.
Had no fear.
Age 6, I think's when she first saw Jesus. The article I read was that he was dressed in the attire of a pope. He looked like the pope, but it was Jesus, and he spoke to her, and it changed her life. I mean, she dedicated her life to Jesus, and that's when her parents wanted her to marry, as Jennifer had said, and she said, "No, I'm already given myself to Jesus Christ, and marriage is not part of my journey."
That's correct.
Right. So I want to back up a little bit there. So she felt that was her calling at between ages 5 and 6, and then by age 7 is when she vows her perpetual virginity to Jesus. So
Yeah.
her family, as you mentioned, by age 12 is when they would start the process of arranging the marriage back then. Now we're talking about 1359. So by age 12, the parents were attempting to start that process, but that's when she, like you said, cuts off her hair and she protests the whole thing. And she endures this kind of push and pull between her family for years and years and years. So it was a test of her conviction before she was really truly tested out there in the world, out there in the universe, And then between 16 and 18, her father witnessed a dove above her head. And
Yes.
that's when they were like, okay, maybe we're on to something. Maybe she really is meant for this life.
Yep.
And that's when they granted her a space to actually practice within her own house. And Saint Catherine is known for extreme fasting and disciplining herself. And we just had a really great homily, I think it was last week or the week before, about discipline and how it brings you closer to God. I mean, you can practice it for other things too in your life. And this is how I love talking about the saints, because we could apply these lessons to other areas of our lives other than our relationship with God. But she would also wear a metal chain at her waist, and it was just like these practices that really, I guess,
Yeah.
it's for lack of a better word, helped her suffer and
Yeah.
become closer to God. And would we do that? I don't know, in that same way, or do we do it in other ways? Do we endure suffering in other ways?
Exactly. And like she was willing, whatever God asked her to do, she did.
Right. And that's why I'm assuming by age 19, she then experiences what Mike had mentioned, the mystical marriage. And that's where she could see the invisible ring on her finger. And it was kind of the turning point for her. She's emerging from her seclusion and begins her active service for God. And so she starts nursing the sick and traveling and serving the poor and trying to really connect with people and share her love of God with others after she's already endured so much by the age of 19,
Right.
convincing her family that she's not one for marriage at that time period. Again, we're talking about the 1300s, getting through that and the strictness of obviously doing what you're told by your parents to follow what God is telling her. That's a
Right.
huge feat. And I know it's hard to imagine at this day and age, but I don't want to like ramble on and on. Did you guys have anything to add for that?
You were never rambling, Andrea. It's all good. No, keep going, because I do know with the the Pope, when he moved to France, she had a
A
great,
huge,
huge
yeah.
influence on him. And again, an uneducated young woman. So
Yeah. So before we get there, did you guys read about her near-death experience?
Mm-hmm.
When she was 23, she had a very drastic and scary near-death experience that she reported visions of heaven, hell, and purgatory. And
yes.
she heard a command that was telling her to give birth to a race of men that shall hate sin and love me with a great and burning love. So it was part of that turning point of when she was doing more public service and writing letters and things, and having that vision really like scared her and made her even more. I mean, like, was she not taking it seriously enough? I feel like she did a lot. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And so by then she was summoned to Florence. So these visions, and she's traveling and around the 60s and 70s. So by 1360 and 1370. So by that point, she's then summoned to Florence by the Dominican General Chapter for questioning about the crowds that she's attracting, because she's having such influence. And she becomes known for this very holy, humble personality, and being known for your holiness at that time is like a huge compliment. So that person that summons her to Florence then becomes Master General of the Dominican Order, and he's the one who writes her official biography. So
Yes.
that's where we get a lot of the information from. She travels to Pisa in 1375, and that's where she receives the stigmata, and it was only visible to her, as you mentioned, but she was also, others in her circle kind of reported this. So that's the source, if
Right.
we
Yeah.
mentioned. So then by 1376, she's learning how to write. And I think this is just important to mention as like the timeline. Before she learned how to write, she was just transcribing everything through a secretary, and that's how we had those earlier records of things that she did and said. But this is a big year for her. She travels to Avignon. So the Pope had lived in Avignon for 70 years. So I had looked into why the Pope was in France rather than Rome at this point. And I thought at first that she was able to convince him to come back to Rome because Rome was more powerful. And I'm not a huge history buff. I don't know when things, when Rome was doing well or not. But after looking into this, we have a short little like history nut here. At this point, so 1377, France was much more safe than Rome. There was a lot of rival families at each other's throats, and the political stability was also a concern in Rome. A lot of Europeans also believed that the Pope over that 70 years of the Avignon Papacy, that they were becoming too reliant on France. And she is able to convince him to return to Rome because of these reasons. Rome was the see of Saint Peter, so that's where, for her, it was a big issue, because she believed that Christ had entrusted Peter with the leadership of the church, and since Peter died in Rome, the papacy should remain in Rome. So it wasn't because Rome was more powerful that he returned, or that he was being urged by people to return to Rome, or that it was even the safest place to be. It's
Right.
just, hey, this is what the Bible is telling us, and this is what Jesus entrusted on Peter. So you should be there too. And she had referred to the Pope as Christ's representative, and she wanted to return him to the place where God had wanted him to be in the
Exactly.
beginning. Her letters were also a source for us to look into how she spoke to the Pope at the time, because that was another question of mine. Like, why would he listen to this woman at this time period? And it was
Right.
because of her holy reputation, and how much people loved and adored her, and they followed her, and she was very courageous. So in her letters, she was speaking to the Pope, urging him to not act out of fear and stay in France because it's safer, because it's a better place to be at the time. She wanted him to be courageous and returned from Avignon to Rome, because it would prove that his trust lies in God and not in what's, I don't want to say what's trending at the time.
Right.
It kind of is helpful to use like modern language when we talk about this. I think it really
Right.
humanizes the situation. And her recurring theme in these letters is that a shepherd should not abandon its flock. So that was one of the arguments. The church also, another reason, the church needed reform. So the reform begins with the Pope. And in order to do that, to reform the church, he needs to return back to where it all began. And let's end this and let's bring everybody together.
Exactly.
And bringing him there allowed him to appoint certain bishops and address the corruption that was taking place in Rome, as well as promoting faithfulness to the clergy. The unity of the church was another thing. There was a schism, and this would help bring that back together. And I mentioned he listened to Catherine because of her reputation, because of her holiness, and she was very bold when she spoke, but she also had a lot of respect whenever she would speak to the Pope. And this point, too, he was already considering a return back to Rome. A lot of people believed that the Pope should reside in Rome. So it wasn't just like Saint Catherine came and appeared and gave her message, and then he was like, yeah, sure, I'll go. He was already debating so much, and people were already talking about it so much that, okay, this is a real sign here. And others agreed with her.
Right. And she wrote, she was a powerful writer and talked about one of my favorite quotes that I'm sure you guys read, but she said, "Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire." And that is a mantra we should all use constantly and remind ourselves, be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. I love that.
And that, by the way, she was also a patron saint of firefighters, and that is wise because of that quote, because of the set the world on fire quote.
Yes.
She was a patron saint of firefighters. There's several saints that are patron saints of firefighters, but she's one of them. As I read that, I thought, I got to figure out why with the firefighters, but that's why, because of that quote, referring to the world on fire.
Yeah.
And also that she was courageous. She went forward into danger without hesitation.
No hesitation. Yeah.
That's the other reason.
She was always willing, no problems. He was someone who was sick, no problem. Deal with this, the Pope, no problem.
Like Andrea had mentioned, she spent her whole life fasting and suffering in ways that she didn't need to do. She was like she was choosing to make her life, like suffering in her life,
she
to
was
make
carrying
her
the cross.
more,
and that's what Jesus
more
was
like
asking.
Jesus,
Right.
To like Jesus, to give you the stigmata, the pains of that alone. I don't know why anybody would want that, but she felt a calling in her heart that's God was telling her this was her journey. And it kind of reminds us that, it doesn't matter if you're educated or poor, God picks people to do missions for him, not on social status or anything like that. This is what
he loves everybody.
I think everybody is going to have God speak to them at some point. If you're listening and hear him, you'll get the message.
Absolutely. And I think everything that she endured prepared her for that, and endured by her own hand for the most part in the beginning there. But just to kind of like wrap up those later years of her life up until her death, before the schism occurred, when the Pope returned back to Rome, she was sent to Florence to help negotiate. There was an assassination attempt that was made on her, and it missed her, but she had talked about it in her writings, that she felt like she lost the red rose of martyrdom, and she returns to Siena at that point. But it's interesting how she saw that as like, oh my gosh, I could have been, martyred. And she felt like maybe there's that survivor guilt a little bit. But she ends up dictating the dialogue. It's called The Dialogue of Divine Providence. And that is one of her huge theological works that you can look up. And it's described as a conversation between the soul and God. So while she's, working on that, later that year, the schism begins when the church, came back to Rome. It wasn't like France was like, oh yeah, sure, you can do that. There was an anti-pope, Clement VII, against Pope Urban VI in Rome. And Catherine really supported that whole time period of the schism and
Right.
supporting Urban VI. And she spent the rest of her life writing these letters, encouraging the cardinals, the princes, and the Pope to defend the papacy, return to Rome. And she ends up dying. We mentioned it early on at age 33, and she died of a stroke, I believe. Did you guys read the
Yeah,
same
that's
cause of
what
death?
I heard.
Yeah.
And she's buried at the Basilica of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. And then she's canonized later on in the 1400s. But I think, yeah, it was really, whenever you guys were talking about the be who God meant for you to be, that quote, it really does come to fruition for her. She knew her purpose. And then she also urged others of their abilities to lead and to lead with courage. And it was from one of her letters that quote was pulled. If you are who you ought to be, you will set fire to all of Italy and not only yonder, where the actual
Right.
was the actual quote. And then it was, summarized to be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. And I hope that anybody listening can really take that in and really breathe life to that for themselves, because I certainly will.
Again, I kept wanting to know more and more and more about her. And this is another one we could do too, but this is our last one for season 3, so we will not. But did you find any Bible verses you wanted to share with us?
Yes. Okay. This one's a little bit longer than usual. Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. Then I said, Ah, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a youth. But the Lord said to me, Do not say, I am only a youth, for to all whom I send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. I think in this verse, it captures Jeremiah's youth and his self-doubt, but the command from God to just stand firm in your beliefs and lead and do what I say, and I'll always be with you. Don't worry about your age, where you're at in life, or whatever it is, these other outstanding factors. Just follow me. And it's like just following that light. It's simple, it's easy to say, but it's not always easy to do. And so whenever you're faced with a huge challenge like that and you feel like you're being called to something, try to follow that light. And this also speaks truth to Saint Catherine's journey as well. She just followed it all the way through.
She sure did. Again, be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. I think that's the lesson we take with us today.
I love that quote.
I know, right? And we need, as I said, and we do not all have to be Catherine of Siena. We all have our own journeys. We just need to be who we are, but we need to become the person or people that God wanted us to be, right? And he is asking us, are you willing? That's what he asks Catherine. Are you willing? And she said, yes, I am. And how many of us are willing? Lord, here I am, use me.
Right. And she was illiterate for most of her life. She suffered. She suffered the death of her siblings. I mean, she went through all of that. And then she was faced with all these challenges with the papacy and everything. And it's just such a great message to take in.
Exactly. So on that note, I think we're going to close season 3. And everybody out there, thank you for joining us. Again, please text us, email, let us know what saints you want to hear about. And again, we're not saints, and we're definitely not done learning about them. There you go.
I love that. Ooh, that was good. Oh,
Wow.
We had a really strong quote, and then that was a really good saying.
Write that down. Put that in there.
Yeah. So anyway, we will be back soon.
Yes. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of We're Not Saints. For more of the We're Not Saints shenanigans and behind-the-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram at We're Not Saints 1. That's We're Not Saints 1. Without the apostrophe. And be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear from you. So leave us a comment or a review, or contact us by email at we'renotsaints1@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to have a great companion to your weekly saint studies with us, you can purchase a copy of my books. Are You There, Mary? How to Resurrect in Love After Loss, Finding Love in the Confessional, or When Vice Happens. Available as a Kindle version or paperback on Amazon.
All these links will be provided in the description of this episode. And don't forget to tune in next Wednesday for our weekly dose of saints. God bless you.
Should you read it again with more intonation?
No.
It was very Mike.